He laughed at me. My own son held up the record like it was covered in mold, some relic he couldn't believe I'd bothered to keep. Mom, seriously? Who even plays these anymore? This stuff is taking up half the garage. When are you gonna admit it's just obsolete junk? He dropped it back in the milk crate like it had personally offended him. The vinyl didn't crack. It had survived worse. I just looked at him, not angry, not hurt, just quiet. But something tightened in my chest that morning. So small, you'd miss it if you weren't paying attention. Ryan hadn't planned to visit. He rarely did. Maybe every few months, just long enough to remind himself I was still breathing. He always arrived in a rush. Bluetooth earpiece blinking, car idling in the driveway like he might flee at any moment. "You really need to clean this place out," he said, kicking at a box of old magazines. "It's like a time capsule in here, and not the good kind." I didn't answer. What would I say? That the milk crates held my father's entire record collection? That each album had a story, a moment, a piece of who he was? Ryan wouldn't care. He never asked where anything came from, just saw clutter, saw old. He noticed the turntable in the corner, the one I'd plugged in the night before, just to hear my father's voice again. Not his actual voice, of course, but the music he loved, the jazz that filled our house on Sunday mornings when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. "This thing still work?" Ryan asked, not really curious, just filling silence. "It works," I said quietly. "You should donate it. All of it." He gestured broadly at the crates, the shelves, the boxes I'd moved from the old house after Jack died. "Maybe get some space back. You don't need to live like this." Still, I said nothing. I'd gotten good at swallowing things whole, words, grief, the disappointment of watching your child become someone you barely recognize. After Jack passed, Ryan changed, harder, faster, always chasing the next promotion, the next investment, the next status symbol that proved he'd made it further than his old man ever did. And me, I was just the woman, still living in a house that smelled like dust, and yesterday, surrounded by things that meant nothing to anyone but ghosts. He glanced at his phone, already halfway out the door. "Anyway, I only stopped by because I was in the area. Client meeting downtown. Try not to trip over all this stuff, okay?" "Okay," I said. I walked him out. It's what mothers do, even when the door closes with a sound that feels like punctuation. When he was gone, I returned to the crates, pulled out a record at random, Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. The cover was worn at the edges, the vinyl inside fingerprinted with decades. I placed it on the turntable, lowered the needle, and let the first notes fill the room. My father, Thomas Brennan, had been a bartender at a jazz club in Chicago. Not famous, not wealthy, just a man who loved music the way some men love God. He collected records the way other people collected coins or stamps, each one chosen deliberately, listened to until the grooves wore soft. When he died in 1987, the collection came to me. Through every move, every loss, every slow unraveling of what we once called family, I kept them close. Not because I thought they were worth anything, just because when I played them, I could still hear him humming along in the kitchen, still see him tapping his fingers on the bar while Coltrane played. The records weren't pristine. Some had scratches, others water damage from a basement flood in '92. But they were mine. They were him. And the story wasn't over yet. I sat on the floor, the music washing over me, and thought about Ryan's words, obsolete junk. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was holding on to the past too tightly, or maybe, I thought, he just didn't know how to look. The next morning brought rain. Not the dramatic kind, just steady drizzle that made the streets shine like black glass. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching water pool in the driveway where Ryan's car had been. Around noon, I heard footsteps on the porch. Not heavy, light, careful. I didn't need to look. Emma, my granddaughter, Ryan's daughter, the one part of him that still felt like family. "Grandma," she called, knocking once before letting herself in. You didn't answer my text yesterday. I had company, I said. Your father stopped by. Her eyebrows lifted. He didn't mention it. No, I said. I imagine he wouldn't. She unwound her scarf, shaking rain from her hair. She was 22, studying music history at the university, part-time job at a vintage bookstore downtown. Every time she visited, the house felt less like a mausoleum and more like a place where breath still mattered. Looking at the records again? She asked, kneeling beside the crates. Your father thinks they're junk. Emma paused, fingers hovering over an old Billie Holiday album. He said that? He said I should donate them, that they're taking up space. She pulled out the Holiday record, examined the cover. This isn't junk, Grandma. Some of these are really rare, like collector-grade rare. I felt something shift in my chest. Your grandfather bought them at the club, back when you could walk into a store and buy a record for $2. Do you know what some of these go for now? I hadn't thought about it. Not once in 40 years. She stood, brushing dust from her jeans. There's a guy I know, professor at the school. He specializes in vintage jazz recordings. We should show him. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the idea felt absurd. These records had been background noise for so long I'd stopped seeing them as anything but memory. I wouldn't even know where to start, I said. I do, Emma said, eyes bright. His office is right on campus. I could set it up for this week. I looked at her, my granddaughter, who had her father's chin but none of his coldness, who asked questions instead of dismissing, who listened. All right, I said. Let's see. Emma made the appointment for Thursday. She offered to drive, but I said no. I needed to do this myself. Not because I didn't trust her, because I needed to remember I still could. I loaded 6 crates into the trunk of my car, chose carefully the ones I knew my father had treasured most, the ones he'd kept in protective sleeves, handled with the reverence some people reserve for scripture. The university campus was larger than I remembered. I parked near the music building, a modern glass structure that looked nothing like the brick halls I'd attended decades ago. Emma met me at the entrance, helped me carry the crates inside. Professor Alan Reeves was younger than I expected, mid-50s, graying at the temples, wire-rimmed glasses. His office smelled like old paper and coffee. Mrs. Carson, he said, shaking my hand. Emma's told me a bit about your collection. I'm very curious. I set the first crate on his desk. He didn't rush. He pulled on cotton gloves, lifted the first record with the kind of care that told me this mattered to him. Do you know the provenance of these? He asked. My father bought them in Chicago, 1,950 seconds through the 70s. He worked at the Blue Haven, a jazz club on the South Side. Professor Reeves stopped moving. He looked up. The Blue Haven? You know it? Know it? He set the record down gently. Mrs. Carson, the Blue Haven was legendary. Thelonious Monk played there. John Coltrane, Dizzy Gillespie. Some of the greatest sessions that never made it to official releases happened in that club. He pulled out another record, examined the label, then another. His hands moved faster now, but still careful, still reverent. After 20 minutes, he straightened. Mrs. Carson, would you mind if I called in a colleague? Someone who specializes in authentication and archival preservation? Is something wrong? I asked. No, he said quietly. Nothing wrong. But I believe what you have here is significant. Very significant. How significant? He smiled, choosing his words. Let's just say this isn't a garage sale collection. His colleague arrived within the hour. Dr. Sarah Kim, music archivist, specialist in mid-century jazz recordings. She photographed labels, examined vinyl under magnification, cross-referenced catalog numbers with databases I didn't know existed. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with something like awe. Mrs. Carson, these aren't just records. Several of these are test pressings, unreleased sessions, the kind of material collectors and museums search for. And this one? She held up a plain white sleeve, This is a private recording from a session at the Blue Haven in 1959. Thelonious Monk. Live. Never released. Never even logged. I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. How do you know it's real? I asked. She pointed to markings I'd never noticed. Handwritten notes in the corner. Initials. A date. This is Monk's handwriting. I've seen his session notes. This matches. Professor Reeves leaned forward. Mrs. Carson, may I ask how your father acquired these? He knew the musicians, I said, the memory surfacing like a photograph. He'd make them drinks. They'd talk music. Sometimes they'd give him records, gifts, gratitude. Dr. Kim nodded. That was common then. Private pressings for friends, club staff. Most were lost or destroyed. The fact that you've preserved these in this condition, it's extraordinary. She paused. Mrs. Carson, based on what I'm seeing, this collection could be valued between $400,000 and $600,000, possibly more at auction. The room went silent. Even Emma, who'd heard wild stories from her professor before, looked stunned. I'd like to document everything, Dr. Kim continued. With your permission, and if you're willing, this deserves to be shared. Museums, archives. This is cultural history. I thought of Ryan. Who plays these anymore? This stuff is taking up half the garage. I smiled quietly to myself. Let me think about it, I said, because I wasn't ready to rush. Not anymore. The drive home felt longer than usual. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and glittering. I had the records secured in the trunk, this time wrapped in protective padding. Dr. Kim had insisted I take. When I pulled into the driveway, the motion sensor light clicked on. Jack had installed it years ago after I'd twisted my ankle stepping off the porch in the dark. I'm not dying because I forgot to turn on a light, he'd said. I could still hear his voice saying it. Inside, I placed the crates back in the garage, not hidden, not ashamed, just where they'd always been. I turned off my phone before making tea. Ryan had called 4 times while I was at the university. I didn't answer, not out of spite, out of clarity. The next morning, Emma called before I'd finished my coffee. Grandma, did you go? I did. And? Her voice bubbled with anticipation. They're not junk, I said, simply. Apparently, they're very rare. Museum quality, they said. There was a pause. Then, softly, I knew it. I knew they mattered. I told her everything. The test pressings, the unreleased Monk session, the valuation that made my hands shake when I thought about it too long. When I finished, she let out a breath. Grandma, this is incredible. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know what I'm not going to do. What's that? Donate them to Goodwill. She laughed, the kind of laugh that fills spaces. An hour later, Professor Reeves called. A contact at Downbeat magazine wanted to write a feature, and the Chicago Jazz Archive had expressed interest in acquiring the collection for their permanent holdings. I'm not selling, I said immediately. Of course not, he assured me. But preservation, documentation, making sure this music isn't lost. That's what they're proposing. I sat with that. Making sure the music isn't lost. All right, I said. Let them call. After we hung up, I pulled out the photo album from the hall closet. Found a picture of my father behind the bar at the Blue Haven. 1,963. Shirt sleeves rolled up, grinning at whoever held the camera. Behind him, barely visible, was a poster for a Coltrane show. I didn't know what the article would say. I didn't know what Ryan would say. But I knew that my father's love for this music, his quiet collecting, his friendships with giants, it hadn't been worthless. It had just been waiting to be heard. The journalist's name was Marcus Chen. Calm voice, good questions, no sensationalism. He met me at the house 2 days later, brought a photographer who treated the records like they were made of glass. This isn't just about value, Marcus said as we talked. It's about preservation. About the Black musicians who created this art form and the people who loved it enough to keep it alive. I told him, about my father, about the Blue Haven, about growing up in a house where Sunday mornings meant Coltrane and Monday nights meant Mingus, about how the music taught me that beauty doesn't announce itself. It just exists, whether you notice or not. When Marcus asked about Ryan's dismissal, I hesitated. Then I told the truth. My son said they were obsolete junk, I said quietly, that I should throw them out. Marcus's pen paused. How did that feel? Like being told the things I love don't matter. Like being told I don't matter. He nodded. Didn't push. Just let me speak. The article ran the following week. Not front page. Arts section, but substantial. 3 pages with photos of the records, a reproduction of the Monk session notes, and a black and white image of my father at the Blue Haven. The headline read, "The Bartender's Archive: How One Woman's Junk Became Jazz History." There was a quote from me, pulled out in large text. It's not obsolete. It's just that no one was listening. That morning, I turned off my phone before the calls started. By noon, I'd received 14 voicemails. Old friends, distant cousins, a woman from the Historical Society I hadn't spoken to in years, and Ryan. 3 messages. The first, casual. Hey Mom, saw something about you in the paper. Pretty wild. Didn't realize those old records were worth anything. Give me a call. The second, less casual. Mom, we should probably talk about this. I mean, this is a big deal. We should figure out what to do with them. The third, defensive. I just think it's strange you didn't tell me before talking to reporters. I mean, we're family. I should have known. I didn't answer. Instead, I called Arthur Weinstein, the estate attorney Professor Reeves had recommended. 2 weeks later, the Carson Music Archive Foundation was established. The records would be donated to the Chicago Jazz Archive. Income from limited reproduction rights would fund scholarships for music students, particularly those studying jazz history and performance. Emma would serve as trustee. Ryan's name appeared nowhere in the documents. I wrote him a letter, mailed it, didn't call first. Ryan, what you said about the records was cruel. What you've said for years, in small ways and large, has been cruel. I don't need an apology now. I needed you to care then. The records are going to a foundation in your grandfather's name. They'll fund scholarships for young musicians. They won't be sold. You won't inherit them. This isn't punishment. It's protection. I'm choosing who carries this forward, and it's the person who asked questions instead of dismissing them. We all leave echoes. I'm deciding what mine will sound like. Mom, the knock came 3 days later. I knew it was Ryan before I opened the door. He stood on the porch without his Bluetooth, without his car running, without excuses. I read your letter, he said. I waited. You really meant it. Not a question. A realization. Yes. He looked past me into the house, at the crate still visible in the garage, at the turntable in the corner. Why didn't you tell me they were valuable? I raised an eyebrow. Because you didn't ask. You never asked where they came from, what they meant, why they mattered. You just saw junk. That's not fair, he started. Fair? I stepped closer. Ryan, you told me to throw out your grandfather's entire legacy. You stood in my garage and laughed at the thing he loved most in the world. And now you're angry because I chose to give it to someone who actually gives a damn? He flinched. I softened slightly. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just tired of being small for you. He stood there, mouth opening and closing like he was trying out words that wouldn't come. Then, quietly, I didn't know how much I didn't know. That's the thing about the past, I said. You don't have to know everything. You just have to stop treating it like garbage. He looked at his shoes. Can I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked slowly, like he was seeing the house for the first time. Stopped at the photo of my father in the hallway, the one Emma had found and framed. I don't remember him, Ryan said. You were 3 when he died. He turned. What was he like? I thought about that. Quiet, kind. He made everyone feel like they mattered, even the musicians who played to empty rooms. especially them. Ryan nodded. I think I've been angry at you, he said finally, after Dad died. I wanted you to be someone else, someone who didn't need things, someone who fit into my life instead of making me fit into yours. And when I wasn't, I punished you for it. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air between us. I walked to the kitchen, put the kettle on, poured 2 cups when it boiled. No ceremony, no sugar cubes, just tea. We didn't talk much after that. He asked about the foundation, about the archive, about the scholarship Emma was helping design. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. I don't expect anything, he said, but I hope someday you'll let me help. I didn't answer right away. Then, you know where the door is. He nodded, closed it gently this time. The exhibition opened on a Saturday in October. The Chicago Jazz Archive had created a small installation. The records displayed in climate-controlled cases, my father's photo enlarged on the wall, listening stations where visitors could hear the music through vintage headphones. Emma stood beside me as we walked through. The first scholarship recipient wants to meet you, she said. I turned. A young man, maybe 19, stood near the entrance, thin, nervous, holding sheet music against his chest like armor. I walked to him, steady and sure. Mrs. Carson, he said, it's an honor. I'm Devin. I play piano. I took his hand in both of mine. The honor's mine, I said. You're why this matters. He smiled. Not polite. Real. That's when I understood. It wasn't just my father's legacy that had survived. It was all of us. Me, Emma, Devin, Ryan, maybe, someday. The music hadn't been obsolete. It had just been waiting for someone to listen. Near the back of the gallery, Ryan appeared, alone. No phone, no rush. He wore a jacket I hadn't seen before and no Bluetooth in his ear. He walked to the display case holding the Monk recording. Stood there a long time. Then he turned, found me across the room. I walked over, slowly, Emma at my side. I listened to it, he said quietly. The recording, the one Monk gave Grandpa. I waited. I didn't know music could sound like that. Like a conversation. Like he was right there in the room. That's what your grandfather said. That jazz was just people talking to each other. The rest of us just got to listen. Ryan nodded. His eyes were wet. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises. But we stood together for a while, looking at the records behind glass. And in that silence, something softened. Maybe not forgiveness, but the beginning of it. Near closing time, Devin came back, brought his sheet music, said he'd composed something inspired by the exhibition, asked if I wanted to hear it. We gathered near the piano in the corner. Devin sat, placed his hands on the keys, and played. It wasn't Monk, wasn't Coltrane. It was him, his voice, but built on what came before, carrying it forward. When he finished, I realized I was crying. Emma slipped her arm around me. That's legacy, she whispered. I nodded. Not the records themselves, not the money, not even the music. It was the act of passing it on, of saying, this mattered, and it still does. Later, as I walked to my car, I thought about my father, about the nights he'd come home from the club, put a record on, and just listen, not because it was worth anything, because it was true. I started the engine, drove home through the quiet streets, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a beginning. If this story meant something to you, ask someone older what they've kept. Not because it's valuable, because it's theirs. Sometimes, the most important things aren't the ones we inherit, they're the ones we finally understand.